So learning to code can feel like a real grind some days, right? Like you're just stuck in slow motion, nothing makes sense. And after a few weeks or a few months, it's easy to start to wonder, am I actually getting anywhere? But what if I told you that if you stick with it, something really unexpected happens? You actually get addicted to it. I know, crazy revelation, right? But today, I actually want to show you why this happens the longer that you stick with programming and what changes when you start to really hit your stride. And I know this because I'm living it right now, right? After months and months and months and months of coding nearly every single day, I've gone from someone who was completely lost to now genuinely hooked on this skill. And I think if you understand why this happens, it will make sticking with this process way easier. So let's get into it. So the first thing that you start to notice is around your routine, right? My coding routine now compared to when I first started. When I first started, I would sit down for maybe 30 minutes, an hour at the beginning. But now, I mean, I can really bank 4, 5, 6, 8, even 12-hour sessions. And sometimes when I'm so deep into it, time just flies. And you know, if you've experienced this, you probably know what I'm talking about. But in terms of like my coding routine has just gotten so much more concentrated and focused now. I'm really able to sort of just dive in. I know how to set up my working environment, what dependencies I need, how to configure things up properly. Even though obviously you still need to look things up, right? You do forget things from time to time, but the difference is now I know what I'm doing. You know, I know what I'm doing in the code editor, and that's really, really cool. I know the process of working from an idea into code, and that's been really satisfying for me as well. And I know that when you get to that point, it's going to be really satisfying for you as well if you're not there already. So in terms of my routine, every single day that I'm sitting down, I just sit there for hours and hours and hours. And sometimes I don't even go outside. I don't even get any sunlight, which I know is a real problem, and I'm trying to be more conscious of it. But some of these sessions, they just become so fun, you know, and I just get so focused. And because of that, you're also able to just get into that flow state so much faster, right? Because you understand the architecture of your project more, and you're really able to focus in on what you're working on, and you're not feeling lost anymore. Well, as lost as I was at the beginning anyway. And that brings me to the second part of this realization that I'm getting very addicted to programming. And there's actually two parts of this section. The first is when I now start to look at programs, you know, look at websites, applications, or even certain builds, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I actually know how to do that. And I think to myself, I built something similar to that. I know how that works. I know what kind of frameworks or tech they're probably using. I have a rough idea of how they structured the project. Obviously not with everything, right? I'm not delusional, but I have a better sense of what is happening under the hood now than I ever have before. And if I wanted to start any of these projects myself, like, I don't know, let's say I wanted to clone like an Airbnb, I know what to start with. You know, I know how to get to the next step. And that kind of adds to this addiction, is because you can kind of plan out these projects mentally, and it really helps to just keep you engaged when you're building something. And the other thing is you just get really addicted to creating. And for me, that's a really satisfying part of being a developer. It's the fact that you can bring things to life that just weren't there before. Being able to take something that was just there in the ether, and then next minute you can put it on a page, you can deploy it to a website, and you have this thing that never existed before come to life. I mean, for me, that's really satisfying. And if you're not feeling that right now, that's fine. But I do think that the more that you build, the more addicting that it becomes, especially when you have ideas for something that you want to build and you know how to make that thing happen. There's just something really empowering about it, really self-fulfilling. You can just build the tools that you want to use yourself. And that takes me to the third part, which is around problem solving, because now the problems are getting really fun to solve. Not every single problem, but a lot of them are. And the reason is a lot of these problems are the ones that are self-inflicted. So for example, I'm building this full stack application at the moment, which I'm actually planning to release a video on pretty soon. And the fun part is really just seeing it all come to life. And the problems I really love to solve are when you're building something on your own and you hit a bug or you hit a wall and you don't know how to get to the next stage. And I really love those problems because, you know, they are self-inflicted, which is kind of masochistic way of thinking about it, but it's true, right? When you care about the problem, it makes it more meaningful. You learn to break every problem down into small parts, right? And then you're breaking those down into even smaller parts, and you're just trying to work through the problem in segments, and then you're bringing it all back together. That stuff gets really enjoyable, and it gets even more enjoyable when the problems are iterations of things you've come across before, because then you can reason through how to approach the problem a lot faster because you've seen a similar problem somewhere else. And the only way to get to that point is by solving a lot of other problems. And you do that by building things, right? And approaching these issues. And then once you solve this problem, you're like, okay, cool. Like, I know how to do that. Then when you approach it again in another project, you're like, oh, okay, that's a similar problem to that one. and you're sort of building these mental models of problem solving. And you're really not going to get there by just sitting and watching videos and consuming information. You only get to that point when you're in the code base and you're building things. And that brings me to part 4, and that is the realization of the real world versus tutorials. And what I mean is, if you've worked on any projects for some time, what you think you're going to start out with and what actually happens when building the project are generally two completely different things. So for example, you might have an idea about how you're going to set up the environment, what tech stack you're going to use, how to ship it, etc. But those decisions that you make at the beginning almost always change, right? Because you are met with different and unique problems. Even if you're setting up your IDE, if you watch a tutorial, right, that tells you step 1, step 2, step 3, this is how you set it up, what to download, etc., you'll eventually run into an issue where you can't move forward. And it could be several reasons. Maybe you haven't downloaded the right dependencies. All those dependencies are out of date. Maybe your operating system isn't compatible with something. Maybe you want to deploy it on your server and you run into back-end server issues. Or maybe your API is not fetching the information that you need because there is some problem with the database, like etc., etc., etc. Some of you are probably sitting there giving me a virtual nod right now because you know what I'm talking about. You try to follow along with a tutorial and it turns out to be a lot more work than what you expected. And the reason is because there are just so many variables. But what I'm finding is I enjoy solving these problems, right? Even though they can be frustrating where all you wanted to do was create a swiper with some images across the page and that turns out to be almost impossible, but it's satisfying, right? When you solve the problem, it's really satisfying and you feel accomplished. And that stuff just adds to the addiction. And that takes me to part 5 around getting addicted to programming, and that is your confidence starts to grow. You start to really prove to yourself that you are genuinely getting better at this skill. Even though it takes a long time, the more and more you expose yourself to code, the more you spend hours and hours and hundreds and thousands of hours just writing code, the more you prove to yourself that you are not an imposter, right? That you are putting in the hard work, that you are building this skill. And yeah, look, at some stages, obviously you might feel less confident. That's just going to happen. This is not an easy thing to pick up. But for me personally, I'm starting to feel less and less of that these days. And I think it's got a lot to do with the fact that I'm making these commitments to myself. I was actually speaking to my wife the other day about it. You know, I'm obviously close to 10 months in now, and I feel like I'm starting to earn my stripes. I'm starting to really grasp a lot of the concepts that were foreign to me before. I'd watch videos, watch conferences, you know, hear developers talk using all sorts of phrases and acronyms that I had no idea about. But now I can actually follow along with almost everything and I sort of know what's happening, which is awesome because I'm less and less in this sort of sea of unknowingness. Unknowingness, is that even a word? I don't know. But yeah, sticking with it, your confidence does grow more. And that takes me to part 6, and that is that what previously felt hard now feels like second nature. And a very basic example is that at the beginning, I would really struggle with not knowing where to start, right? So if I would want to build a project, I'd be like, okay, I want to build this thing. What do I do now? I didn't know the step-by-step of what to start with, the front end, the back end. Do I just get into the code base now? Do I start writing code? Am I using a specific technology? Am I using just JavaScript, or am I going with a React framework? Am I using, you know, Flask with Python for the back end? Am I even creating a database? But now in terms of getting something from an idea into a code base, that bridge has become a lot easier for me. When I first started, that was very fuzzy. I just didn't know how to get to where I needed to get to in terms of like starting and building a project. But now, like I said, that fuzziness, that blurriness from getting from point A to point B, that's really cleared up. And it's almost like second nature now in terms of understanding the architecture of the project and what I need to do. And so yeah, once you've built a few projects and you start understanding the fundamentals properly, it gets easier to conceptualize these projects. And that takes me to part 7 around being addicted, and that is why I'm so drawn to software development. Now, I'm not saying that I was a bad problem solver. I've always been pretty good at it. And I think that's what's drawn me to software development. The fact that I love solving problems outside of software development. I've taught myself so many other skills, you know, being able to adapt and teach myself new skills is not new to me, but what keeps software development addicting is the unique problems that you have to solve. You are a problem solver every single day, and that's essentially what has really drawn me to this skill. If you've experienced something similar, then you know what I'm talking about, right? And it's almost hard to put into words, but there is this magnetic feel about it. Once you start to really get into it, start to really get into your stride, it's hard to stop. I feel like I'm really romanticizing software development. Some people might hate it, but anyway, it's just how I feel, right? It's just my personal opinion. So yeah, anyway, I think I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of this video. Hey, if you are kind of struggling with staying committed, I have created a bit of a workbook. It's called the Dedicated Dev. It kind of gives you a routine and sort of an understanding of how I've been committed for so long. You can see it in the link in the description. But that's it, guys. Keep grinding, keep going. If you are learning to be a software developer at the moment, that's great. If you are enjoying it, that's even better. If you're not enjoying it, then I've got to tell you that it does get better. It really does. You just have to keep going. The more code that you write, the easier that it does get. Obviously, it's not going to get 100% easy all the time. That's just impossible, but it does really become more enjoyable over time. So just stick with it. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys in the next one.